Affirmation Addict podcast. Today we are kind of doing a Halloween inspired episode. I'm not even a Halloween kind of girl, but I thought it was fitting because the day the episode releases, it is Halloween, and we talk about all things spooky, scary, kind of heavier, kind of darker, kind of shadowy. So I thought it'd be a really fun episode to talk about our heavy, shadowy feelings. And they are feelings like fear, doubt, shame, guilt, anxiety, worry, and sadness. And I think these are the common emotions that come up the absolute most on our manifestation journey. And they are so normal. But I feel like when they come up, we feel like we've retreated a couple steps back and we kind of get into a negative thought spiral. So, this episode is fully focused on these shadowy, heavier, spookier emotions because I wanted us to have a little bit of an idea on why these emotions come up, what kind of the root of these emotions are, and some antidotes. So, some different techniques you can do with each of these emotions. So, diving right in, when it comes to heavy emotions, a few things you've probably heard me say this multiple times, but in case you haven't, in case this is your first episode or you just need the reminder today, one thing I want to say is the heavier, scary emotions are not a bad thing, and they are probably never going to go away. I feel like we have this misconception that when we're on the spiritual journey, when you're on the manifestation journey, we're going to feel good all the time, or that we have to feel good all the time. And both of those are not sustainable and they're also false. So, as humans, your job, your role is to feel the full range of human emotions, which includes things like sadness to happiness. And secondly, you're not meant to feel good all the time, because if you always felt good, you would have nothing to understand what good meant. You would have nothing to compare goodness to. And that's why it is so important to give yourself permission to, when a heavy feeling arises, to use it as a kind of a piece of information, as some insight as to, oh, I'm being triggered. There might be a limiting belief under here, or there might be something I need to process and just talk through, or something I need to shift. It is not a bad thing. You're not pushing your manifestations away if a bad feeling comes up, but the longer we stay in a bad feeling and the longer we judge the bad feeling and judge ourselves for having a bad feeling, that is what lowers our vibration. Not feeling the feeling. Feeling the feeling is very normal. Feeling the feeling is actually what you're supposed to do. And I'm going to give you some tips, and then we're going to talk through every single one of the emotions that I feel like are the most popular. So I have 7 of them, and I'll tell you kind of the root cause and some tips. Like I said, antidotes. I thought that was a very cute name, to kind of work through them and what you can tangibly start to focus your energy on when that heavy emotion comes up. So, this might be a good one. I normally don't say this, but this might be a good episode to take some notes on, just because we're going through so many different emotions. Normally, I feel like I focus on one thing, but this one we talk about 7 different emotions. So, if this is something you really care about, listen to this episode and maybe re-listen to it and write down some notes that might help you. So, the first thing in just experiencing these heavy emotions, one thing that I have recently learned, and I think I talked about it last week or the week before, where I think we imagine that our feelings are mental, but our feelings are actually very sensational. They're actually in our bodies significantly more, or maybe completely, than in our minds. I think our feelings, the heavier emotions, can be created in our minds, but when you're experiencing the feeling, it actually lives physically in your body. And this is where embodiment work comes up. And I have yet to do a practice or like a proper session with someone who's an embodiment coach. However, one of my really good friends is, and I'm going to do an embodiment session with her. And this is kind of, she's been teaching me a lot about emotions and processing them, and she's been helping me with that. So for me, one thing that I have only started to recently understand is that I used to try and process my emotions mentally, which would help, right? Like I could mentally talk myself out of feeling sad. I could logically talk myself out of feeling anxious or feeling shameful. But that only goes so far, where there's another layer of the emotion that is sensational. And that's why, and the most emotion I can really resonate with because I experience it the most, is anxiety. And anxiety, when I experience it, at least, it is so physical. Like, I can feel my body start to constrict, my heart starts to constrict, and my heart starts to race really fast. And like, I just feel like I'm in like a state of panic. And that's a very physical response. And I think when I look at a lot of these different emotions, when you look at fear, when you look at doubt, a lot of them manifest as physical responses. And those physical responses are ways of our body trying to process them. If you think about it, right, going back to biology, going back to the animal kingdom, when animals are in fear or in survival mode, their bodies will shake. So when you're scared and you're physically shaking, that is the emotion and experience of fear. So I feel, and I actually probably have taught emotions this way for a long time until recently, where I used to teach emotion and emotional processing, especially these shadow ones, mentally. But now that I have like a different layer of awareness and experience with my own emotions, I'm learning the physical need to process them. And right off the bat, a very, very beautiful way to physically process your emotions is to just feel them in your body. And I will be so honest with you, this is the most uncomfortable thing ever. And this is where you I will try and explain it to you. I'm definitely not like an embodiment coach who can properly explain this to you, but I'll tell you what I've done. So when an uncomfortable emotion, right, like fear, doubt, anxiety comes up, for me, my body responds in a panic, or my body responds in, I want to get away from this. So I start to move. And I definitely talked about last week, where when I feel like I don't want to feel a certain way, I try and avoid or move so I can regain control instead of just sitting with that emotion and letting it arise through my body. And I've been practicing doing that as my emotions come up. And the very interesting thing is, your emotions most of the time really only last 90 seconds. So if you think about it, how much action and how many decisions have you made to avoid a heavy emotion? And how long have you drawn those out, rather than if you could help yourself sit through that uncomfortable feeling physically for about 90 seconds to 2 minutes? And that's what really helps me pass the discomfort as time goes on. So, example, when I'm noticing anxiety, right, I can feel my body start to constrict. Usually I will direct my mind elsewhere. I will do something elsewhere, and that helps. However, one thing I'm also learning is there's a level that can help, and then there's a deeper level where you actually want to let yourself feel the emotion, because you don't want to avoid the emotion. You want to process it, you want to feel it, rather than just suppress it. And suppressing it versus kind of trying to heal it can look very similar, but there's such subtle differences. And one way to know if you're actually processing the emotion is if you're letting yourself feeling it, if you're letting yourself acknowledge and embrace even the heavy emotions. You might be having the question, Pilot, if I'm sitting and embracing all my heavy emotions, I would be in a negative state all the time. Trust me, I thought the same thing when I started learning about this. But like I said, your negative heavy emotions last only 90 seconds, approximately. And we as humans tend to try and avoid these heavy emotions because we hate feeling heavy and uncomfortable. So we live our lives almost like dodging these emotions, when if we could sit with it, it's about 90 seconds and you can move past it. It's so weird, honestly, to do, because that's not what we're taught, right? We avoid feeling hurt. We avoid feeling scared. We avoid feeling guilt. We avoid feeling shameful and doubtful. Like, we do things to actively not feel these feelings. So when they do come up, we don't know what to do with them. So feeling them and processing them is a way and a means for you to transmute them, and it will not lower your vibration. It will not impact what you're manifesting. It will actually only help you, because you're becoming more open. You're releasing, you are creating space, because even if your mind might not feel an emotion and you have not processed it, your body will store emotions. This is where dis-ease comes in the body. All of these heavy emotions are a form of stress, and stress creates stress on the body. And if you look at kind of a holistic or alternative sort of medicine, even traditional medicine, like kind of doctors and stuff, they will say that one of the biggest ways to help yourself heal from crazy diseases like cancer, etc. And this is not all inclusive. However, it is a very big driving force, is that stress that we put on our bodies creates dis-ease, and stress can manifest as fear, doubt, shame, sadness, anxiety, worry, guilt, all of these emotions. And so that's why this work is so powerful, even though it is so uncomfortable. And I will not sugarcoat it for you. When I've been currently learning how to feel my emotions, and it feels like such waves of crawly feelings and crawly sticky energy that makes me want to literally bolt. I want to be anywhere but in my body. But if you can work with your mind to allow your body to process, like your body knows how to process, our mind stops us from processing. So instead of kind of trying to avoid the feeling, what if you can let yourself feel the feeling in your body and in your mind? What if you can talk yourself through it, but also let yourself feel it? I don't think only physically feeling it or only mentally processing it is the answer. I think both cohesively is very, very helpful. So that is kind of my take on how to handle these shadowy emotions. Just welcome them and embrace them. One thing that always helps me whenever these things come up is your emotions are just little signals that your body is sending you that there is something to be worked on. And I like to think of these heavy emotions as just little inner child or inner baby versions of me, because that way I can approach them with a lot more compassion. When I think of it as just like a scary kind of monstrous feeling, it becomes harder for me to manage. So I think of my emotions as like little kind of avatars of me who are a baby, who are innocent and are just trying to feel love. I really do think that all of our emotions want to be replaced with the form of love. And if you can see it that way, you can approach this work and sitting with your emotions with a lot more compassion. So that was a lot. Now I'm going to go through every single emotion, and just a little bit of research I did on some of the root cause, plus my own interpretation of root cause, and some kind of antidotes for each. So, fear, I think this is a huge one. I think we think of fear, and I think there's fear of failure, and I also think there is fear of success. I think fear is probably the biggest one. And I think we immediately associate fear with like phobias, right? Like I get scared in elevators, but I think there's fear of abandonment. There is fear of not being good enough. There is fear of getting hurt. There is fear of death. There is also fear of success. There's also fear of people you love not loving you when you've changed. There's so many versions and iterations of fear, millions that I know, that we all have at least one version of a fear that hasn't come up yet and that we have to work on. So maybe you feel like you're fearless and you're very adventurous and you love going skydiving. That's one version. But there's so many other versions of fear that are emotional fears, that are kind of success or milestone based fears, or familial or relationship based fears. There's so many types of fears, and it's natural, right? So fear is actually a survival mechanism. It is very evolutionary. It is kind of like when we feel threatened, we optimize and we respond by feeling fear, because feeling fear keeps us away from that threat. Because if we were fearless, we would constantly be putting ourselves in dangerous situations. So creating fear is a biological response to protect you. But a lot of the things we're scared of in today's world, we do not actually need protecting from. We need strength and awareness to realize that we're not that fragile. So a very quick way I actually respond to when I'm feeling fear is just reminding myself, like, this is a biological response. I really don't have that much to be scared of, and reminding myself that I am safe. Like, I have a very underlying fear of success, and I've noticed it as my business has grown. I've noticed myself stop myself from growing. I've noticed lots of different layers where I will speak in the past tense because I'm working through it, where I had a really big fear of success. And one thing that an affirmation I created for myself was, it is safe for me to be successful. So, whatever fear that you start to identify, my tip for you, a quick antidote, is reminding yourself that you're safe if the opposite happens, or even if the fear happens, even if it's a good kind of fear. The next one is learned fears. You might have seen something bad happen. You might have seen or heard a story or seen it in a movie, and it's a learned fear. So, if this is a learned fear that's being triggered, go in and just reprogram the learned fear. Ask yourself where the root cause is. Ask yourself who told it to you. Ask yourself if it's 100% true all the time. There is a reprogramming workshop, not even workshop, like journaling prompt that I take myself through often. And I think it's in my app. So if you want to go through that, go ahead and go through that. It's a really easy way for you to kind of mentally challenge your beliefs. The next emotion is doubt. I think doubt is very much so rooted when things cannot be explained, when they defy logic, very against our left brain. I think we really start to feel a lot of doubt when it's unrealistic. So, the antidote for that one is think of times where things worked out without it being realistic. I have so many examples of things working out in a way where I couldn't have fathomed, where I couldn't have planned it. Logic was fully defied. And I'm sure you have at least one moment, even if it's a simple moment of you thinking of someone and them calling you in that moment. That's pretty mystical, and that works out in a very interesting way. So think of those little moments as ways to kind of poke holes in your emotion and reminding yourself that, hey, I don't actually have to feel this doubt, or doubt isn't that scary. The other thing with doubt is it can be rooted in a lot of lack of self confidence, self trust, or self esteem. I've noticed I feel doubt when I don't trust myself to go through it. And the antidote for this one is working on your self confidence, working on your ability to trust yourself to handle and be resourceful in situations where you don't know. And you'd be surprised at how good you are at handling the unknown and building up that trust in yourself, because maybe you haven't been put in a testing situation in a while, so you're losing trust in yourself if you can go through that. Or maybe you're taking on a really hard physical feat like running a marathon and you've never run it before, so you're like, am I going to finish it? So just building that trust where even if you get hurt halfway through or feel tired, you will find a way to move forward, and trusting your inner resilience and building up your inner resilience through things like affirmations, all of the things. The next one is shame. This is a big one I've been feeling recently, actually. So it's so interesting because I think shame is rooted in two things. One is a societal and cultural need to fit in. We feel shame, and biologically, we go into tribes. You'll see this constantly. In high school, we have cliques. In the world, we have different categories that we club into, whether it's our gender, whether it's our faith, whether it's our politics, whether it's the country we're from or the sports teams we're in. We have a tendency as humans to group into similar environments based off of these common interests or common belief systems. And so I think shame comes from when you're starting to go against one or many of the kind of groups or identity layers that you've put yourself in or that you've been familiarized to. So you start to feel shame because it's like, oh, like, are they going to judge me? So the antidote for that is, whose judgment are you afraid of, and are they actually going to judge you? One thing for me is, once again, fear of success, shame of success. Like, I get very uncomfortable when people in my life listen to my podcast, like people who I'm friends with or my family members listen to my podcast or buy my products or engage my products. Like, I cannot handle that. It makes me so embarrassed and shameful. And it is in a root of like, I'm doing something that nobody else in my life is doing. And I'm nervous that they'll have so much to say. And I'm nervous that I'm not fitting in. I know I'm already not fitting in, but I don't always talk about what I do because I get nervous of the judgment. And the way I talk myself through it is, why am I afraid of their judgment? whose judgment I'm afraid of, and just working through those emotions. The next one with shame is the other thing is you might be crossing your own moral or ethical belief systems or boundaries that you've set for yourself. And I've experienced this too, where I've done things that I'm not the most proud of, but I wanted to do them and it was important to me, and my values weren't being crossed. It was the values that everybody else put on me. So identify once again the grain that you were going against. Identify what boundary are you crossing. Identify what are you doing differently that you feel like you shouldn't be doing, because that's where shame comes from. It's very embarrassment, humiliation coded. The next emotion is a huge one. I talk about this a lot because it's probably my most prominent emotion that I've dealt with so much since I was a little girl, which is anxiety. And I actually don't necessarily know where my anxiety started from when I was little. I also believe in past lives. I believe in projections. I believe in multiple things that we can't always explain. So, one of the root causes, and actually the only root cause I have for this, because I think the anxiety we experience in our day to day life is like the uncertainty of the outcome that's going to happen, or kind of anticipating or expecting something bad to happen. And I think we've all felt anxiety. I think we've all expected the worst or have been nervous that the worst is going to happen. And that often is why we experience anxiety. So, my antidote for you is such a fun one. I talk about this a lot because I think it is so powerful. Is whatever situation you are anxious towards, write down 15 ways it can work out, realistic and unrealistic, and get creative. It is such a powerful exercise. And yes, write them down, ideally by hand. If you can't, type them on a computer or write them on the notes app in your phone or send a text message to yourself, whatever it is. But seeing those kind of listed out in some way, shape, or form creates such a new neural connection, that you can't help but start to diminish that anxiety. So, very, very helpful. I experience this when I experience random anxiety and deep anxiety. It's so powerful. The next one is worry. This is similar to anxiety, but it is very future focused. So, my antidote for worry is be where your feet are. That is a phrase that has been coming up for me so much, is be here now. When we are worried about something happening in the future, similar to anxiety. But what is worry going to do? Not much. So, my antidote for worry is come back to the present, come back to right here and right now. Be where you are, enjoy where you're at, find ways to be appreciative of what's going on. And another way worry happens is through habitual thinking of the worst case scenario. This can be learned. This can just be a pattern. This can be a habit. It might not be intentional, but it could just be a habit of worrying. I know a lot of people in my life who just can't help but worry, even though they have such good intentions. They just can't help it. And so, my antidote for this, it's going to be the same one for anxiety, is think of your best case scenarios and focus on them. What happens if it works out in the best way? And play it out afterwards, not just the immediate best case scenario, but life after the best case scenario works out. The next emotion is guilt. This is similar to shame, but one of the reasons we feel guilt is if you're crossing your own moral code or your own or society's moral code, and that can be a lot of pressure. So, identify and check if it's actually a value or a kind of a belief of your own that you have broken, and work through that first. Because if it's not your own belief and you're feeling guilt and it's just like an expectation, that becomes kind of a root of people pleasing, and we're trying to make sure everybody else feels good so we can fit in. So, if it is your own moral code that you've broken, you already know how to work through that, which I talked about. But if you don't know if it's your own or society's, then work through people pleasing. Like, why am I trying to fit in? I know my worth, I know where I'm good, and I know what value I bring to the world, but I also am allowed to do things a little bit differently. So, work through people pleasing is a big focus, setting boundaries and owning your boundaries, like with respect and responsibility. If you feel guilt and it is the different way where it's like you've unintentionally harmed someone, the best thing I can say, because there are unfortunate situations that happen, maybe you realize or you're looking back on the way you handled a situation, and you're like, wow, that was kind of shitty. And I know I've done this. I've recently looked back on some of the things I did. I was like, ooh, I would not do it the same way. But it's like we mature, like you don't have awareness or your priorities are different 5 years ago. And feeling guilt for yourself is a good thing, I think. I think it's a great emotion because you can choose how to move forward and you can choose not to make that same mistake again. But in order to transmute that feeling and work on it, is one, forgiveness, forgiving yourself, forgiving those involved, and then also apologize. If you really do feel like you messed up, admit it. Admit it. Be like, hey, I know this is 5 years late, but I'm really sorry for what happened. And I've had to do this multiple times. I made a lot of mistakes, air quotes, when my priorities were different. I didn't prioritize certain friendships. I didn't prioritize certain family members. There were people I've hurt along the way. And I apologized, saying, hey, I'm sorry if I hurt you through this. I realized how that could have been hurtful. And I'm sorry. And I hope you can forgive me. And then also forgiving yourself, because you were 99.99%. All humans are doing the best that they can. They're doing what they think is the best thing possible. And if that person can't forgive you, that's okay, but you can forgive yourself. And that last emotion is sadness. Usually, sadness comes due to a trigger, right? Whether it's loss, whether it's like the death of someone you love, whether it's feeling grief through someone who's really hurt you, maybe it's heartbreak. Sadness is a very deep, depth, soul kind of opening emotion. And I've only felt true sadness a few times. And when that emotion comes up, I think the biggest reminder I can say to you is allow yourself to feel sad. You do not have to feel happy all the time. And sometimes it's sadness. You are able to later on realize how much good there is in the world. But feeling sad can be a beautiful blessing that something or someone was so good that it allowed you to feel sad. But what I recommend doing, like as you're feeling sad and navigating through that emotion, is try and find joy in the little moments. Do the things that make you little doses of happy, and don't feel guilty for feeling good when you can be feeling sad. And that kind of crosses over into guilt. And so ask yourself, how do I make peace with what's going on and how I'm feeling, while also being able to feel multiple emotions? It is such a complex emotion, and allowing yourself to feel and be in the complexities, where in one moment you'll feel so happy and in one moment you'll feel so sad and hurt. That's okay. Be very gentle with yourself when you're experiencing sadness and even guilt, and then move forward with gratitude. There's always one thing we can be grateful for, whether it's your breath, whether it's the sun rising, whether it's clean water to drink, or go deeper and go specific. But these are the ways I recommend transmuting all of these emotions, from fear to sadness, from doubt to anxiety, and shame to worry. I hope that this deep dive into all these emotions and feelings was helpful, because I never want you to feel like you're not allowed to feel bad or shadowy or heavy. You're allowed to and you're meant to. And honestly, it's never going to go away. So the more and more you can make peace with these emotions, the more and more you can embrace them and look at them as little lessons and little signals from your soul to dive deeper and unpeel a more loving layer of yourself. I like to think of my heavy emotions as a pathway to deeper unconditional love. And that really helps me move forward. So embrace these emotions, talk to them, listen to them, and just love on them. Like a lot of the times, these emotions are just lacking love. So if you don't take anything away from this, from all these little tidbits I gave you, how can you replace love? How can you replace any of these heavy emotions with love? How can you replace fear with love? How can you replace doubt with love, shame with love, anxiety with love, worry with love, guilt with love, and sadness with love? Whether it's related to the same trigger, whether it's completely irrelevant, that is my biggest little takeaway for you to take. if you don't take anything else from this episode, is I do think all of our shadows are craving a little bit of love, whether it's your own, whether it is somebody else's kind of acceptance of you feeling that way, whether it is just the acknowledgement that it is okay to feel that way. All of these are forms of love and compassion and kindness, and your heavy emotions are not that heavy once you learn how to kind of be with them. So I hope you enjoyed this episode. Let me know if you found this helpful, and I will see you in the next episode.